Hello, government students. Today we're going to talk about media literacy. What makes news media reliable? What makes news media unreliable? What's real news? What's fake news? And to get started on this topic, I'd like to show you this quote from Thomas Jefferson. Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. What Jefferson is saying here is that a free and independent and reliable news media is absolutely imperative. And in fact, you cannot have a representative government, a democracy, if you do not have an independent press. It is the press which actually ensures that our democracy thrives, that our government does not become authoritarian. And for that reason, our founding fathers were sure to include in the First Amendment the freedom of the press. Okay, that's an absolutely vital thing for a democracy. Our founding fathers believed that freedom of the press was necessary for successful self-governance. And Thomas Jefferson's quote surely indicates that. So, let's talk about media then and what makes a reliable news source. First of all, we need to know who is publishing the story. We want to look for reliable sources that practice responsible reporting. Now, how do we know if they're practicing responsible reporting? Well, good news organizations will typically require two sources for their news stories, and they will never pay their sources for information. So I have here our local paper, the Rockford Register-Star. The Rockford Register-Star does, in fact, follow basic journalism tenets such as having two sources for their stories. In addition, the Rockford Register-Star would never pay their sources for information. That's not the case with certain news publications, especially those that you see, for example, on the shelves in the grocery store near the checkout counter. We call these types of publications here on the right, like the National Enquirer, we call these tabloid publications. And in fact, they do pay sources for information. And I don't believe I have ever seen the National Enquirer or a similar organization ever admit to a mistake, for example. And I seriously doubt if they require two sources for the information that they get. You know, paying sources for information, clearly that provides an incentive for someone to provide information to a news organization. That is not true. They have an incentive to give whatever is going to attract the attention of the newspaper, in this case the National Enquirer. So they may be willing to fudge the truth a little bit for money, and then the Enquirer will publish that information. That's not to say that everything that the National Enquirer publishes is not true. That's not the case at all. They do publish a lot of things that are true, but they do not follow basic journalism standards that a quality paper such as the New York Times, Washington Post, or even the Rockford Register-Star would follow. They do not pay, they will pay their sources, and they will not use two sources for information. And along the lines I just mentioned, all news sources will in fact make mistakes, but good news sources will publicly admit it. They will publicly correct their mistakes when they are discovered. Again, a publication like the Enquirer, I don't think you will see them correcting their mistakes, but you do see retractions in a paper like the Rockford Register-Star. When they do publish something incorrect and they find out about it, they will retract the previous story publicly. A few more things that make a reliable news source. Reliable news organizations will state who is reporting the story. It's called the byline. Over here we have a byline. Okay, this tells us who wrote this story. A reliable news source will tell you who wrote the story. If you do not see the author of a news story showing up, I would immediately have some skepticism about that story. So keep that in mind. Reliable news organizations will also clearly show if what you are reading is a straight news story, or if it's opinion, or if it's advertisement. So over here we have the Rockford Register-Star's opinion page. We know that when you're reading the stuff on this page, it is opinion. It's not straight news, it's someone's opinion. Advertisements should also be clearly marked as advertisements, and the Rockford Register-Star does in fact follow that rule as well. but not all journalism does. Not all news sources do follow that. Sometimes it's hard to tell if it's an advertisement or not. A couple of more. Reliable news organizations will try to be objective. They don't just report one side of the story. That's very, very important. And related to that is this idea here, though, that when leaders lie or mislead the public and the media reports it, that does not mean that they're not being objective. That's the job of the media. We need to know when our leaders aren't telling us the truth. So when a leader is caught in a lie, you won't have a reliable paper saying, okay, we believe he lied because of this, but maybe he didn't lie because of this. If it's clearly a lie, they need to tell us that. Again, that gets to Jefferson's point that we need the media to keep our government honest, to keep it from sliding into authoritarianism. And then the last point, a reliable news organization doesn't just report positive stories about one political party and negative stories about the other. When they do that, that's propaganda. There are television networks today in America that will never say anything bad about a particular political party, but they will always point out the bad about the other political party, and they'll never say anything good about the other political party. When that happens, you're not really watching news, you're watching propaganda. And we need to be able to distinguish between what is real news and what is a story that is so skewed and so subjective that it becomes propaganda. Okay, that kind of leads us to the next topic, and we're going to spend the rest of this video on this subject. The subject is fake news. That's a real highly charged word that we hear a lot these days. People always claiming something is just fake news. Sometimes they make that claim and it is not fake news at all. So we need to be able to distinguish between what is real news and what is fake news. I'm going to start off with this picture here. This is an item that showed up in social media some time ago. The picture was taken in South Africa, and let's read what it says. Considered one of the best photos of this century. A lioness and her cub were walking, but the heat was excessive, and the cub was in great distress while walking. The elephant realized that the cub would soon die and carried him to a pool of water alongside the mother. Wild animals, huh? It's such a heartwarming story, but I wish it were true, but it is not. This is not a real story. This is a photoshopped picture. And here we have the author, the writer of this little blurb. We would assume that this is an African writing this, Luflerpa. However, if we read this name backwards, what does it spell? It spells April Fools. Okay, this was an April Fool's joke. Now, interestingly, this was put out by a wildlife sanctuary in South Africa. They weren't trying to, do anything deceptive or anything bad by putting this out. Really, what they were doing was an April Fool's joke, and they wanted to get publicity for their animal sanctuary. And that's really a pretty innocent thing. And of course, they did come clean that it was an April Fool's joke. But not all of these fake stories are going to be so harmless as this. And this was truly harmless. Let's take a look at another one. This also appeared in social media. Here's the headline. A Muslim student set fire to a Christian school in protest of U.S. President Donald Trump. And down here we have the details. Tanuza Jamal Hassan, a college student from Minneapolis, has been charged with intentionally setting 4 fires at St. Catherine's University in St. Paul to protest against President Trump. 19-year-old Tanuza Jamal Hassan has confessed to police that she started the fires on Wednesday. Hassan told police her intent was to hurt people and to burn the Christian university to the ground. Wow. Looks pretty bad. And this is interesting too, because in this particular case, there is some truth to the story. This is here, in fact, a picture of Tanuza Jamal Hassan, the college student who was charged with arson. She did, in fact, set fires in the administrative building of her college, St. Catherine's. But what is not true is this picture right here. This picture was not St. Catherine's School. This is not the fire that she set. In fact, this particular young lady set just a couple of small little fires in garbage cans. I believe she set 4 garbage cans on fire. That is the contents inside the garbage cans. You picture a couple of wadded up pieces of paper. She set those on fire. It was enough to set off the smoke detectors, and she was in fact caught and arrested for arson. However, she did not cause this fire. This fire here that you see is actually a fire from about 7 years earlier that took place in Canada, in Quebec, Canada, not at St. Catherine's University in St. Paul. So why would someone put this fake picture up there and imply that she did something truly, truly heinous and bad? Well, she's Muslim and she's not white. She's a woman of color. And I think that more than likely, whoever put this out was trying to generate some emotional negative response against Muslims in America. This came out, not too long after we became involved in, actions overseas and in Muslim countries. And really, I think this is trying to generate a big to-do over Muslims in our country. So yeah, not true, very much misleading by putting that picture up here, even though there are some elements of truth to the story. So how do you distinguish between real news and fake news? Well, there's 3 websites that I want you to be aware of that we're going to use over the next several days in our class that are fact-checking websites. The first is Snopes.com. Snopes is a privately owned organization. It began as a site to verify urban legends, things like, some kind of a Bigfoot sighting, happened somewhere, silly things like that. But over time, Snopes evolved and it is now mostly used on news stories to find out whether or not the stories that you see in the news or might hear about in social media are in fact true. It gets its funding from ads and some donations, but it is a well-regarded source for fact-checking. Another important one is PolitiFact.com. This began as a subsidiary of the St. Petersburg Times newspaper out of Florida. And some time ago, the nonprofit Poynter Institute of Journalism purchased PolitiFact.com, and it is a highly regarded fact-checking site. And the other one I want you to be aware of is factcheck.org. Factcheck.org is sponsored by the Annenberg School of Communications at Pennsylvania University. That's Penn, which is a Ivy League school. Highly regarded part of the University of Pennsylvania. And this is, again, a fact-checking site that I highly recommend, and we will be using that in our class in the next couple of days. With that being said, I'm going to close out this presentation, and be sure to check Canvas to see what is in store for you there. Have a great day.